A modern transport network is essential. It's the circulation system of the nation. It must be healthy and free-flowing. But today, it's becoming clogged. Railways are crowded, roads congested. The population is growing and demand for travel is rising. The new North-South line HS2 is like a bypass, easing the strain on the clogged arteries of the system.
Using the analogy of clogged arteries, it would seem reasonable that a heart surgeon would choose to bypass the most clogged arteries to assist in curing the patient's circulation system. According to First Group, the West Coast Main Line is unusual in that it has quite a lot of spare capacity. Euston is the least crowded London terminus, bar one. This means that HS2 is not tackling the most critically clogged arteries, and this could have catastrophic effects on the rail system.
It will provide the capacity of a 12-lane motorway, but only take the space of a dual carriageway. And it will stimulate growth in towns and cities across Britain.
HS2 will stimulate some growth, but it is likely to be quite narrowly restricted to areas around the limited number of stations on the HS2 route, rather than across Britain. There is, however, the danger that stimulation of the already most economically strong northern towns and cities will be at the expense of others bypassed by HS2, such as Stoke, Stafford, Coventry, etc. This is discussed at length in Professor John Tomoney's paper, The Local and Regional Impacts of High-Speed Rail in the UK, a review of the evidence.
But projects this size need clear justification. The £42 billion budget includes contingency and will be spread over decades for a line that will repay £2 for every pound spent.
The ratio 2:1 is disputed by many economists as optimistic, and both the National Audit Office and the Public Accounts Committee have suggested that the benefits should be revised down markedly, while David Tice of the New Economics Foundation questions whether, given its diverse goals, HS2 is the best investment possible, and it is not enough that it passes a minimum threshold of return.
HS2 will not be built at the expense of other transport.
At 351 miles, HS2 is only 3% of over 10,000 miles of the UK rail network, but consumes 44% of the total spend. This leaves just 56% of the rail budget for the remaining 97%.
HS2 will not be built at the expense of other transport. Much more is being spent on roads and existing railways than on HS2. Some believe technology will remove the need to travel. But despite the emergence of social media, Skype and smartphones, UK rail passenger journeys have doubled.
This is a meaningless statement, as it does not state the period during which passenger numbers have doubled. However, the recent trend for long-distance travel appears to be decreasing.
Alternatives to HS2 wouldn't deliver enough capacity.
This statement is challenged by 51M and independent organisations. Both the National Audit Office and the Institute of Directors reports point to incremental rail upgrades across Britain as alternatives, bringing increased capacity faster and cheaper, and with better benefit-cost ratios.
And would require years of closures and disruption.
Any major railworks will cause disruption. To imply that HS2 will not is fanciful and deliberately misleading. For example, Euston station approach and rebuild is scheduled to take at least a decade. Construction works through Camden from Euston, together with construction traffic, will cause massive disruption for commuters and general traffic in Camden. The M1 is to be diverted in 2 places, and it is inconceivable that this will not cause disruption.
But concerns about the impact of the line deserve to be heard, and where we can adapt our plans, we will.
In practice, in most cases, it has been impossible to get HS2 Ltd to adopt alternative, less destructive plans.
There's a high-speed train from London to Brussels, but not Birmingham. To the Alps, but not to Manchester. That has to be wrong.
It is indeed wrong. According to the EU definition of high-speed rail, the East Coast Main Line, Midland Main Line and the West Coast Main Line are already high-speed railways. All these routes could be upgraded, and with in-cab signalling could accommodate higher speeds, which would compare favourably with most EU high-speed rail average speeds.
Britain can only grow properly if it grows together.
In his critique, HS2 The Regional Impact, Professor Mike Geddes discusses the unequal impacts of growth associated with HS2, pointing out there will be losers as well as winners. Evidence to the Parliamentary Committee on HS2 highlights cuts to long-distance services that are forecast as a result of HS2. After the introduction of high-speed services to the Kent coast, passengers faced significantly longer and reduced frequency of services to London from towns like Deal.
The new line will revitalise Britain's rail network.
HS2 will revitalise a small part of the UK rail network, with some relatively small connectivity improvements at a limited number of stations along its route, at a disproportionate cost. HS2 Ltd highlights some £7.2 billion of indicative cuts to services, frequency and/or increased journey times between a number of intermediate towns and cities on the West Coast Main Line to London.
Provide better connections for 18 of our biggest towns and cities.
Some passengers who currently enjoy direct services to London will be required to change trains in Birmingham after HS2.
And create jobs.
Some commentators feel there are faster, cheaper ways to create jobs starting immediately. Many of the job predictions are merely relocations of jobs from elsewhere. HS2 will also be directly responsible for the loss of thousands of jobs. Professor Mike Geddes writes that HS2 will help support, not create, jobs.
Homes.
HS2 will not create one home. It may well act as a catalyst for investment in home building, but this is separate to the investment sunk in HS2 and would require millions of pounds of public and/or private investment to do so, and is not included in the £50 billion budget earmarked for HS2. The construction of HS2 will require the demolition of some 1,800 homes, several hundred in Euston alone.
And business.
Small and large businesses in the path of HS2 will be demolished, and many more will be put at threat because of loss of trade during construction.
But it's not just a new line, it's an engine for growth.
Given the huge costs, the difficulty in forecasting passenger numbers in 30 years, and the growth in technology, there is no guarantee that the building of a high-speed rail line will generate economic growth without endless public subsidy. If high-speed rail were a guaranteed engine for growth, Spain's economy should be booming. Instead, it has massive debt. Japan is also mired in debt due to high-speed rail construction.
Providing a £15 billion annual boost to the economy.
This £15 billion figure has been widely criticised by experts as exaggerating the wider economic benefits. Professor of Statistical Modelling, Dan Graham, suggests the figures have no statistical basis. Professor of Economic Geography and former advisor to HS2 Ltd, Henry Overman, accused KPMG of using a procedure that was essentially made up, and suggested accurate assessment would reduce the estimate by a factor of 6 to 8.
For a closer, growing Britain.
No one in Britain will be closer because of HS2.